I was staying at a cabin in Canada. It's a family-owned lodge, nothing too big or fancy, just something my grandparents built and kept up with. So every now and again, someone in the family would enjoy a getaway there. This was just after the new year. I planned to stay 3 nights at the cabin. It was out in the middle of nowhere on some off-the-grid property that I had to get to by snowmobile, which was normal around this time of year. When I got there, I fired up the wood heater and set up my stuff in the bedroom. Within just 30 minutes, I started to feel the sense of relief that I was hoping for. Time felt to move slower out here, and there was nothing to crowd my mind with. I could just lay back and enjoy the peace and quiet. The rest of that day and night was nice. I got up in the morning at sunrise, making breakfast on top of the wood stove. Then I bundled up to head outside and grab more wood. When I opened the front door, I was taken aback. There were footprints in the snow coming right up to the cabin. I immediately stepped outside and looked around. Then I followed them for a while. They led into the woods with no signs of going toward the road, which was several miles away. How could they be way out here and not have taken a snowmobile? And why were they out here to begin with? I was really confused, especially with them having to have come up to the cabin during the middle of the night. Otherwise, I would have heard them in the morning. I got wood from the shed and brought it inside. I debated leaving, but I figured if they came by and didn't do anything, then it must have been an accident. Not to mention how much of a hassle it was to get to and from the cabin. It just would have made this trip a huge waste to leave now. I sat by the fire and just kept a lookout for the next couple hours. I didn't see anything. As the sun got higher and the temperature got warmer, I threw my jacket back on and wanted to go for a walk in the woods to pass the time. I decided I might as well take the opportunity to see if the footprints led anywhere. Maybe I'd find another cabin or something, which would put my mind at ease. I followed them into the woods. I walked for probably 20 minutes, not passing any signs of anything. It was just one continuous trail of prints in the snow going through the woods, until I suddenly heard something ahead of me. I whipped my head up and looked ahead. It was suddenly quiet and everything was still, just endless trees and snow. I knew what I heard was the crunch of a footstep. There was no mistaking it. I felt goosebumps all over my body, as I knew someone was out there in front of me, having to be hiding behind one of the trees. They probably just noticed me and quickly hid, maybe 10 or 15 feet from where I was. "Hello? Is someone out there?" There was no response, not even the slightest sound. As the tension grew, I felt like I had to do something. I decided to turn around and run back to the cabin. I packed everything as quickly as I could, locked up the cabin, and took the snowmobile back to the road. I don't know what happened at that cabin, or what was going to happen, but I have no doubt that that person in the woods was the same person who came by in the middle of the night. Them being on the way back to my cabin only shows that it was no accident. I haven't been back to the cabin after that. Every year, around the end of February, me and my good friend Justin take a camping trip to the same place. We both did a lot of backpacking and camping, but there was always something different and nice about camping in a snowy forest. With the right gear, it wasn't all that unsafe either. This year, we got there and set up our tents, built up a campfire, and enjoyed a couple drinks around the flames. It wasn't really that long after we got there that we suddenly heard something horrifying. It was this dark scream in the distance, echoing across the landscape. It only lasted a few seconds, then it went quiet again. Both of us jumped up from our chairs though, startled by it. It sounded too far for us to even have a chance at seeing who it was, but we looked in that direction anyway. Justin seemed to think that it had to be an animal just making an eerily human sound, because there was no way someone else was out here. I was pretty sure it had to be a person, but either way, we didn't really know what to do about it, other than wait and see if we heard it again. A while passed, and nothing else came. The sun started to set, and the temperature started dropping. We grabbed some more wood to put into the fire, and made food. But then, again, out of nowhere, that scream sounded. It was closer, like maybe only 200 feet away from where our camp was. Justin and I looked at each other, both thinking that we should probably check it out before the sun was fully set. I grabbed my knife just in case, and we both bundled up and headed into the woods. We tried to walk cautiously, unsure what exactly we were walking up on. We had maybe gotten 150 feet out, when we heard it one more time from almost right next to us. I stopped and stared in that direction, but there was nothing there. I glanced at Justin, and he seemed as worried as I was. We must have stood still and waited there for nearly 5 minutes before Justin started slowly stepping forward again. He passed a few trees when he suddenly stopped, and I could sense the fear through his body language. I stepped up next to him, and I almost threw up. There was a deer carcass laying in the snow, definitely having been put down recently. Then I felt Justin's hand tap on my shoulder. I lifted my gaze up, and standing across the forest, there was a person. He was just standing there, wearing hardly any winter clothing, and he was watching us, almost like he was observing us. Justin tapped on my shoulder harder, and I understood what he meant. Both of us left and hurried back to our camp. We didn't even speak as we packed our things in a rush and got out of the area. I don't think there's an explanation for what we saw, or who that was out there, or even if that was the person we heard screaming. After that, we stopped going to our camping spot and settled on a different area, hoping to never come across something like that again. It was the day before Christmas Eve. I had hopped in my car to do a few DoorDash deliveries, hoping the holiday season would bring in some better tips. It was around 11 p.m. when I got this order. It was a normal one, just a bag of food to drop off at their house. Most of my previous orders were actually grocery deliveries, probably because stores would be closing up for the next 2 days. The address on this one was far though, farther than I'd usually be willing to drive, but with not many other orders coming through, I took it anyway. It was lightly snowing outside, and the roads were very quiet, making the drive peaceful. The house was not in an average neighborhood though. When I pulled up to what I thought was going to be the entrance to the neighborhood, it was actually just a thin path through the trees, with a small cabin-looking home at the end. I pulled down and parked, getting out with the food. I walked up to the door and gave it a few knocks. Inside, I could hear chatter, like a group of people laughing and talking over each other. It sounded like so many people, I was actually confused on how they could all fit in such a small cabin. There was also something strange about the way it sounded that just didn't seem right. Something was off. Then the door opened. A man stood in front of me, and the contrast to what I expected had me put off for a second. The inside of the house was still, motionless. Nobody was running around, and most of the lights weren't even on. And yet, the sound of a huge holiday party was coming from the small room at the end of the hallway. The man smiled at me. "Why don't you come bring the food inside? They'll be happy to see you." That was an odd thing to say. I began stuttering, trying to say no and make up an excuse, but the man interrupted. "They just want to thank you for working during the holidays. You'll be glad you stopped by." All the while he was saying these strange and honestly creepy things, the chatter in the back of the cabin continued until it suddenly cut out. Just like that, the cabin was quiet. It was like a recording or tape had stopped playing. The man looked back for a moment, clearly not expecting that to happen, and before he could do anything, I dropped the bag on the porch and ran back to my car. I got in and drove away. I stopped doing deliveries for the night and just stayed home for the rest of the holidays. I know nothing actually happened at that cabin, but it's how disturbingly strange everything was, and the thought of what could have happened that still freaks me out. It was the day after Christmas, and I worked at a small family-owned grocery store as an overnight stalker. I'm not even sure why I was scheduled this night, because we were closed for Christmas, and it was probably really slow during the day, so there wasn't much for me to do as far as stalking. I spent the first hour filling what little needed to be filled on the shelves, but then I kinda just wandered around. As I was walking past the front of the store, I noticed a person outside, unusually close to the building for this time of night. It looked like he was just walking around, but he quickly noticed me looking at him, and instead of going away, he came closer to the window. He didn't say anything or try knocking, he just stared at me. I felt really uneasy and wasn't sure what to do. After a few seconds of him not looking away, I turned and walked away from the window. I guess I was just trying to play it off, like I wasn't bothered. That was very strange though, like no normal person acts like that. I waited a few minutes before going back to the front of the store and looking out the window. He was gone. I sighed in relief, then continued walking around the store to pass the time. I was just weaving in and out of the aisles, fixing up some of the shelves. Maybe 10 minutes had passed when I rounded the corner at the end of one of the aisles and immediately stopped walking. There were several boxes that had fallen off the shelves and were scattered on the floor. They weren't small things either that could have just tipped over. They had to have been knocked down or moved by someone. Just as I was trying to process it, I heard something from down the aisle. A soft but deep and eerie laugh, like a man quietly laughing right around the end of the aisle. It almost sounded unnatural, like a grown adult giggling like a child. Part of me thought about going to confront him, but when I remembered the man I saw by the window, they were fairly big and could have had something hidden in their jacket. I ran to the front and out the doors, getting in my car and calling the police. They pulled in 10 minutes later, and the man inside the store was gone. We later got hold of the security tapes and saw him find a way in through a side door, and as he hid behind the aisle, laughing at me, he held a knife in his hand, some kind of small switchblade. Cops think he wasn't sober, and I don't disagree, but I also don't think it changes anything. I could have died that night if things had gone any differently. It was New Year's Eve. I was never a big party person, but on big nights like these, I almost always got peer pressured into going out. This year, my friend was hosting a party at his place. He was kind of known as the rich friend because he had a big house with land and everything. My buddy Trav picked me up around 9 and we drove to the party. There were maybe 20 or 30 people there. Nothing too crazy, but enough to get me drinking more than I should have. We played some drinking games and watched the ball drop, and overall, it was a good time. Around 3 a.m. though, I was ready to leave, but I found Trav passed out on a bed upstairs. Figuring he, and probably nobody else here, was sober enough to drive, I went outside and ordered an Uber. It said they were 10 minutes away, so I sat down on the curb at the end of the driveway and waited. His house wasn't really near any big roads. It was kind of away from everything. Nice and quiet, which was good for me to relax after a night like that. I just sat there and curled up under my jacket and waited for the ride for what felt like only 4 or 5 minutes when a car pulled up. "Uber?" the guy called out. I jumped up and got in, kind of startled by how I'd lost track of time like that. I guess I really was wasted. I got settled in the back seat and he started driving. The man looked like he was 50-ish, with short dark hair and a thick beard. "Big party tonight?" he asked. "Oh, yeah, I guess so," I responded, though I wasn't much in the mood for small talk. He glanced at me in the mirror, and something about the look he gave me just made me uncomfortable. I really don't know why. At the time, I thought I was just overthinking it. I put my head back and closed my eyes, trying to rest for the remainder of the ride. But only a minute later, my phone dinged. I opened my eyes, immediately making eye contact with the driver in the mirror. He was already looking at me. I awkwardly glanced away and pulled my phone out. My stomach tightened and my face went pale. It was a message from the Uber app, a text saying the driver just arrived at the pickup location, and a following text from the driver asking where I was. I looked back up at the mirror. The man's eyes were locked on me. I put my phone back in my pocket, leaned my head back, and closed my eyes again. Inside, I was freaking out and terrified, but I tried to play it off like I didn't know anything. 30 seconds later, I felt the car slowing down, and when I peeked out the window, I saw we were at an intersection with a red light. As soon as the car stopped, I opened the door and jumped out. Midway through getting out, he started driving, which made me fall on the pavement, but I got up and sprinted away. He drove off after that. I don't know who that man was, but seemingly he was going around on New Year's night and picking up random drunk people waiting for Ubers. There were so many signs I missed, like the fact we weren't even going in the direction of my home. I was just too out of it to think straight. Honestly, I never even should have gotten in the car without checking my phone. Where he would have taken me and what would have happened is unknown. It was the first weekend of February. I was at home having the days off of work. Everything was pretty regular, but sometime in the middle of the day on Saturday, I thought I heard something from upstairs. It was a thud, just one, and not very alarmingly loud or anything. I'd never heard it before, which was the only reason I went up to see if I could figure out what it was. I didn't find anything though. I wasn't worried and hardly thought about it for the rest of the day. Hours later, and as I was winding down for the night, sitting on the couch and barely keeping my eyes open, there was another thud, almost identical to the last. Again, I looked around and saw nothing. I even opened the door to the spare bedroom, which was entirely empty, and looked around, not seeing anything. Maybe it was an animal on the roof, or just the house making strange noises. I went to bed that night, not too long after. The next day, I got up and went downstairs like usual to make coffee and breakfast. As I did, something felt off. Like as I walked around the kitchen and made breakfast, things seemed like they had been moved. The cereal and chips I had in the pantry just didn't look like they were where I'd left them. Obviously, I didn't purposefully try to remember the order they were in or anything, so I couldn't confirm it. I just had that weird feeling like it wasn't right, which I didn't know how it could be possible. I tried to pay more attention to things the rest of that morning, but eventually I forgot about it. I think I was caught up on how impossible it would have been, so I had to be mistaken. The rest of that day, I was downstairs, watching TV and doing some chores. It was just after sunset when I heard that same thud again. I stood up to go check on it, just like every time before, but as I approached the stairs, I heard a click. It was very quiet, but was definitely a click of some kind. I went up to the top of the steps and listened for a second, then looked around my bedroom, finding nothing. Then I went over to the spare bedroom, figuring I'd might as well check again. I grabbed the handle and turned it, but it stopped halfway. It was locked from the other side. Blood rushed from my face, and my heart stung from the sudden panic. I took a few weak steps away from the door, feeling like my legs were giving out, but I brought myself together when I heard movement behind the door, approaching the other side. I started to run back down the stairs as I heard another click, followed by the door creaking open. I left out the front door and ran to the end of the street, where I called 911. When searching the home, they found no one, but in the spare bedroom closet, there were grocery bags and a blanket. Someone had been trying to live in there, at least for those 2 days, but probably even longer, without me knowing. Likely they were coming out at night while I was sleeping to go downstairs and eat and drink and do whatever. It sends chills through me just thinking about it. Thankfully, they seem to have left for good after that night. What they would have done had I found them is something I never even want to know. I was staying inside for the night. It was really cold outside, with a heavy snowstorm coming through our town. I had the TV playing my comfort show, and I was half asleep on the couch when I heard footsteps approaching outside my front door. Their boots were loud enough to get my attention and wake me up. I looked at the door, but they didn't knock. They stood there for a few seconds, then their boots took a couple more steps before it suddenly went quiet. It sounded like they stepped off the porch and into the snow, which I could no longer hear. Confused, I got up and looked out the window. The snowstorm was worse than I thought. It was almost completely white outside, making it hard to see more than a few feet past the window. Barely, I could make out shoe prints in the snow coming off of the porch. Why did they just step off the porch like that? And what were they even doing outside right now? With the weather, I couldn't really get any more answers. I checked out the side and back windows for any more shoe prints in case they walked around my house, but I didn't see much of anything. I went back to the couch and laid down. I felt it was weird, but I didn't want to overreact about it. An hour or so went by, and there was nothing else. The soft rumble of the snowstorm outside and the low volume of the TV made my eyes heavy, slowly putting me to sleep. When my eyes eventually opened, it was still very dark. The TV was on its timeout screen, showing it was 3 a.m. The snowstorm was still going strong, but strangely, it was much louder. As I continued to wake up, I began realizing it was extremely loud, like the sound was clear and crisp, not muffled by the windows. My eyes darted fully open and I got up. I turned on the light next to me, seeing water spots all over the room, going right to the front door, which was wide open. Snow was pouring into the house, and boot prints were outlined in the water going through the hallway. I could kind of make out the same boot prints leaving the house, but I wasn't sure. I got my phone and locked myself in the bathroom as I called for help. Turned out whoever broke in had already left. It seemed they came in and looked around for something specific, and after not finding it, they just walked back out into the blizzard. While they were in my home, they either somehow didn't notice me on the couch or crept past me, quietly looking around my house without waking me. Even the idea of it creeps the hell out of me. I haven't had a good night's sleep after that, constantly waking up in the middle of the night, startled by every little creak. It was just before Christmas. School was out, but my parents still worked during the day. I was an only child, which meant I had the whole house alone and could do whatever I wanted all day while they were gone. This was just another weekday, I think Tuesday, and my parents left for work at 9. I immediately fired up my PC in my bedroom and started gaming. Strangely, only 15 or 20 minutes after my parents had left, there was a knock at the front door. Being young and not used to answering the door alone, I chose to ignore it. I tried not to make too much noise for the next little bit because I didn't want them to think anyone was home, hoping they would just leave. I didn't hear any more knocks, so I continued on with my day. I was playing video games for way too long, honestly, like 3 or 4 hours straight before I even got up from my desk to make some breakfast. I went downstairs and poured a bowl of cereal, then started walking back to bring it upstairs when I noticed the front door was unlocked. I thought that was weird because my parents always remembered to lock it and usually would leave through the garage anyway. I went over and slid the lock down, then went back up to my room. I think it was around 1 or 2 p.m. After finishing eating, I got right back to gaming. I had just reopened my game and loaded into a new match, so like only 3 minutes later, when I felt something shake my desk. I didn't hear anything, but I had my headset on, so it was unlikely I would have, unless it was really loud. It felt like a vibration though, which I'd usually only feel from my parents closing a door or something. I took my headset off and looked at the bedroom door, listening for what could have caused it. It was quiet. I got up and opened the door, then looked down the hallway toward the stairs, again listening for anything, and again not hearing anything. I was thinking it could have been the heater turning on, but I couldn't help but think how the door was unlocked earlier, and it just gave me an uneasy feeling. I walked over to the stairs, and just as I got to the top and looked down, I saw a shadow move near the bottom. I froze, and just a second later, the shadow stopped moving too, like they somehow saw me. My heart was pounding. I felt like I stood motionless for an entire minute before the shadow moved again. I could faintly hear footsteps walking toward the back of the house, and then the back door quietly open and close, and then silence. I ran to my parents' bedroom and called 911 with the home phone. Police came a few minutes later. This only seemed to get more disturbing and strange though. There were no signs of the intruder breaking in unless he had picked the lock on the front door. However, it was still locked when police arrived. which means he likely got inside sometime during the 3 to 4 hours I was gaming. I also think back to the knocks I heard right after my parents had left, but I just can't see what they were doing inside for that long. He was almost definitely in the house when I went downstairs and made myself a bowl of cereal though, maybe even watching me from another room, hiding somewhere. We don't know what his intentions were, but I've never truly felt safe again since that day. I worked at a gas station for 2 years, starting in 2015. During the winter on my first year, I had a regular customer come in a lot. I worked night shifts, so whenever anyone came in more than once, I'd usually recognize them. This guy was a trucker who told me his name was Paul. He was a really nice guy, though he definitely had something different about him. He was always smiley, like too smiley and happy, especially for it being the middle of the night. Sometimes I actually found it creepy. Anyway, one night he came in and he was acting differently. He walked in and greeted me, but as he looked around the aisles, his face was dull and almost angry. He picked out an energy drink and came up to the counter, and his face suddenly changed back to that overly happy look. I could see dread in his eyes though, making his smile seem even more fake and almost disturbing in a way. He paid and walked out to his truck, then drove off. I'd almost forgotten about it until the next day when I saw his truck pull in again. It was pretty cold and snowy outside. When Paul came in, he had that same look as yesterday, except he didn't smile at all. He grabbed the first drink on the shelf and came up to the counter. As he paid, he started asking me questions, like how busy it was tonight and when my shift was over. Then, before he left, he asked if I wouldn't mind helping him lift something in his truck. Having known him for so long now, I agreed, wanting to be helpful, and put on my jacket and followed him outside. The gas station was empty, aside from his truck, parked on the far side of the lot. I followed him over there, and he opened the passenger door, then walked around to the driver's side and got in. He said it was right up here, gesturing for me to get in as well. I climbed up and sat down. It was one of those big box trucks that had a door behind the seats for access to the cargo section. I looked at Paul. He had that strange, wide smile again. "It's just right in there. I'll follow behind you." He pointed at the door. I suddenly felt very unsettled and could sense that this wasn't what he said it was. I sat there, trying to figure out what to say or do, and I began to notice an odor. It was strong and disgusting, coming from whatever the hell was behind that door. I looked back up at Paul. His face was tense, but he held that smile and just watched me, waiting for me to move. I jumped back out of the truck, slamming the door behind me and hurrying back into the station. He didn't follow. As I was hurrying back though, I thought I heard him yell, like a frustrated yell coming from the truck. The wind covered most of the sound. He pulled out of the gas station soon after. I worked there for another year, and Paul never showed up again, not even once. I don't know what was back there, or what was really going on with Paul, but I think I was lucky to not have to find out. I was taking a road trip across the country to my family's house for Christmas. I know driving that long of distance during winter is probably not a great idea, but I couldn't find anyone to watch my dog, Frankie, so I had to bring him with me. He's just a little wiener dog, and I thought he'd be terrified of flying, so I decided to drive. The first half of the trip down there went well without any issues. Great weather, easy driving, and no problems. On the morning of the second part of the drive, though, I woke up to heavy downfall of snow. I packed up quickly and tried to outrun the weather, but it seemed to only get worse. Halfway there, I realized it was taking too long, and I wouldn't make it there by the end of the night, so I ended up choosing to find a motel to stay at instead. The road I was on was pretty empty. There wasn't much of anything, aside from the occasional gas station, every 50 or so miles. So when I finally saw a sign for a motel, I immediately pulled off and into the parking lot. It was a very old-looking building, and most of the lights were off, but there was another car parked here, so I figured it had to be a worker. I left the car on for Frankie as I got out and walked through the blizzard and up to the main entrance. The door wouldn't open. I wiped the fog off the outside of the window and put my face closer, trying to look through and see if anyone was inside, but it looked dark and deserted. I wasn't sure what to think, but I didn't have much time before I heard Frankie barking. I looked back, seeing two men walking past my car and up to me. The way they walked, it was clear something was wrong. I tried to start walking back to my car and ignore them, but they cut me off. "Hey, was the place open?" No. I think it's closed tonight. Sorry," I said, trying to walk around them. "Do you think you could help us? We're having some car troubles. Maybe you could spare some gas." It was like they were fighting for any reason to keep talking to me. I said no, then backed up and made a wide walk around them, and even then, they still tried to get in front of me. I hurried back into my car as their footsteps crunched quickly behind me. By the time I got in and locked the doors, they were already at my window. Frankie was whining, and I couldn't blame him. This was really uncomfortable and kind of scary since we were so far out on a deserted road. One of them repeatedly knocked on my window, asking for help still, but it was so obvious that he didn't need any, and this was just some kind of trap or something. Before anything could get worse, I backed up and drove out onto the main road. After giving it some thought, I ended up dialing 911 to report their strange behavior. I got a call back from an officer 20 minutes later, saying they weren't at the parking lot anymore, and neither was their car. If that doesn't scream guilty, I don't know what does. Their car clearly worked enough for them to leave, and they apparently left right after I did. More so than my slight interaction with the men, it's the thought of what they were potentially trying to do that horrifies me. If anything had happened out there, I probably never would have been found.